The sky above the wasteland was a fractured bruise of black and molten orange, its air thick with the chemical stink of ion discharge. Kalen ran hard across the ridge of scorched obsidian sand, each step sinking into the heat-softened crust. Behind her, the roar of engines and the metallic clatter of armored limbs closed in, a relentless rhythm that matched the pounding of her own pulse. Plasma bolts hissed past her head, leaving trails of heat against her skin. A shell from an ion cannon detonated to her right, shattering the ground into a spray of glowing shards. She didn't bother looking back. She already knew who was there. Sentinel. The war machine draped in bone-plated armor, its skull-faced helm glaring with the cold light of 1,000 executions. It was the one who had taken her sister years ago in the chaos of the Purge, and the one she had sworn to kill before. She drew her last breath. The irony was almost laughable. Another volley rained down, one bolt searing the sand inches from her feet, the next slicing a hot line across her shoulder. She veered toward the jagged remains of a fallen sky dreadnought, using the shattered hull as cover. The air vibrated with the deep bass thrum of pursuit drones. Her breathing came fast, harsh, each inhalation tasting of ash. A shadow fell over her. She twisted around in time to see Sentinel breaking from the pack, moving faster than seemed possible for something that heavy. The alien tyrant's voice cut through the chaos, amplified and sharp. "You'll die like the rest, Kalen. Forgotten, nameless, wasted." The shot came before she could answer, a lance of blue-white plasma punching straight through her chest. Pain bloomed, white, jagged, consuming. She stumbled backward into the sand, heat pooling in her lungs, the world narrowing to a single cold point in the center of her vision. Her last breath left her in a soundless gasp, and then there was nothing. No heat, no pain, no sky, just blackness, thick and endless, swallowing her whole. The black shifted, became movement. Shapes began to form, ivory arcs, twisting and grinding like the vertebrae of some massive beast. The darkness receded enough for her to see she was lying in the center of a circle made of bone. Not dead bone, living bone, each piece shifting slightly as though listening. The air was wet and cold, carrying a smell both ancient and wrong. A figure loomed above her, tall and impossibly thin, its body a lattice of sinew and alien alloy. Its skin was a pale gray that shimmered faintly, like frost catching light. Its eyes burned blue, not like flame, but like the heart of a frozen star. "You are dead," the voice said, low and resonant, curling through her skull in a way that bypassed her ears. "But I will not allow it." Her limbs felt weightless, detached, but she managed to rasp, "Who?" "Names have no meaning to the dead," the figure replied. "Aye, but you may call me near." One skeletal hand extended toward her, and she saw the other held something black and metallic, shaped like a blade but edged with lines of pulsing light. Before she could react, Nair drove the thing into the base of her spine. Cold fire erupted through her body, spreading outward in serrated waves. Her vision flickered between this place and somewhere else, places she didn't know but somehow remembered. She saw fields of shattered planets, oceans of bone, creatures with too many eyes tearing through the dark. When the pain receded enough for her to breathe, she realized she could hear something else, whispers. Hundreds of them, layered on top of each other, muttering in a language she didn't know yet understood too well. They weren't coming from outside her, they were inside. Nir's eyes never left hers. "The graft is done. You now carry the chorus of the dead. With them you will command the hunters that stalk the edge of life and death." Her voice was barely more than a growl. "Why me? You already knew how to kill," he said simply. "Now you will learn what it means to unkill." The bone circle shifted. From its edges, shapes began to rise, elongated forms with spines like saw blades, skulls stretched into predator maws, limbs ending in claws made of sharpened femurs. They moved as if drawn toward her heartbeat. She stumbled to her feet, the graft at her spine throbbing with a rhythm that wasn't hers. The creatures stopped an arm's length away, their heads tilting in unison, nostrils flaring. The whispers in her skull surged, an overlapping roar of hunger. Kalen clenched her fists. "If I refuse—" "You will collapse into dust," Nir said, as if it were nothing more than a fact. "And your sister will remain where she is, a mind fed into the tyrant's engine until nothing of her remains." Her eyes narrowed. "You know about her. I know about all of them." Every soul harvested, every consciousness stripped. The alien necromancer stepped closer, the cold emanating from him soaking into her bones. "The tyrant who hunts you is building something that will make this wasteland permanent. You will stop him, or you will die again, and this time there will be no return." She looked at the creatures circling her, felt their claws scrape against the inside of her mind. With every breath she took, the The whispers grew louder, pressing against her thoughts, eroding the edges of who she was. She already understood. Every time she called them, they would take something from her in return. Her gaze lifted to the fractured sky above, its storms flashing with the glow of distant orbital weapons. She thought of her sister, her face, her voice, wondering how many summons it would take before even those memories were gone. Finally, she met Nir's stare and said, "Fine, but when this is over, you tell me how to make them silent." The alien's mouth curled into something that might have been a smile or a warning. "If you survive," he said, "you will not want them silent." Somewhere in the distance, the thunder of engines began again. Sentinel was coming. And now, Kaelin had the dead on her side. Before the shot that ended her life, before the cold grip of Nir's graft burrowed into her spine, Kaelin had been something else entirely. A name whispered in fear through the underworld of the outer colonies. She was the one who never missed, never hesitated, never spared. A professional killer in a galaxy that made murder into a business. She had survived longer than most because she trusted no one and nothing. Every job was calculated, every target was reduced to a set of vulnerabilities, and every escape was planned 3 steps ahead. She lived in the shadows between orbiting cities and fractured moons, where law was just a word and loyalty was as fragile as the hull of a rusted freighter. But all of that had cracked the day the purge came. The day Sentinel and his bone-plated enforcers stormed the safe house on Viral Station, dragging her younger sister into the glare of the harvest lights. She had been too far away, locked in combat with another squad, hearing her sister's voice over the comms cut off mid-scream as they injected her with the consciousness siphon. Later, she had learned what that meant. Her sister's mind had been pulled apart, fractured into data strands, and locked inside one of the Tetrarch's mind harvest towers. A soul fragment, the Necromancer had called it, alive in a sense, imprisoned in every way that mattered. Since then, Kaelin's work had lost its precision. She still killed, but there was a hunger in it now, a recklessness she could feel burning at the edges of her control. Every target was just a shadow of the one she wanted, Sentinel, and every job was just a step toward a confrontation she knew she might not survive. She had no allies, no safe house, no reason to believe anyone could be trusted. That was before her death. Now, resurrected by alien technology she barely understood, she found herself staring across the wasteland toward a place she'd only heard of in rumors, the Spire of Ash. It hung above the horizon like a spear driven into the sky, its base hidden beneath the roiling storms of the galactic wasteland. Naya had told her it was a city, not a human one, not anymore, suspended on an energy axis that kept it floating above. The poisoned metal sands. Below, the surface crawled with hunter machines, relics of the war that had made this world uninhabitable. The drones stalked anything warm-blooded, tearing it apart not for meat or defense, but for spare parts. Above, the spire's upper levels glowed faintly, a beacon for ships that brought in more victims for the harvest. She stood with Nir on the ridge of a broken plateau, the wind pulling at her hair, carrying the distant screech of metal grinding against metal. The graft at her spine pulsed faintly, as if responding to the place. Nir's long fingers traced symbols into the dust, each line glowing for a moment before fading. "The Oblivion engine," he said, not looking at her, "is nearly complete. When it activates, it will drink the consciousness of every living human within this system, no matter where they hide. The process would take less than 62 of your minutes." Kaelin's jaw tightened. "And my sister's fragment is in there." "Talk!" Nir finally met her gaze, the cold blue of his eyes, sharp as a blade. "Yes. If you wait, if you hesitate, she will be absorbed. There will be nothing left to recover, not even the fragment." Her fists curled, the skeletal predators in her mind stirring at the flicker of rage. "Then we don't wait. You misunderstand." His voice was calm, almost soft. "I am telling you that time is not merely short. It is a noose tightening around both of our throats. You will not have the luxury of caution or of mercy. You will have to use the graft fully, and you will not like what it demands from you." She stepped closer, close enough to see the shifting patterns beneath his translucent skin. "I didn't ask to like it. I just want her back." Nir tilted his head slightly, as if studying a rare insect. "Do you, or do you want vengeance on the one who took her? You must know they are not the same thing." Her silence was answer enough. She turned away, looking toward the spire again, the glow of its upper tiers flickering in the haze. It looked almost beautiful from this distance, like a sanctuary. But she knew the truth. Inside, every chamber would be filled with the hum of machines eating minds alive, storing them like currency in the Tetrarch's vaults. "What's your angle in this?" she asked finally. "You could have brought back anyone. Why me?" "Because," Nir said, stepping past her to gaze at the horizon, "you are not afraid of killing." And soon you will not be afraid of dying either. That combination is rare, dangerous, necessary. The wind rose, carrying with it the faint tremor of distant engines. Kaelin's eyes narrowed. Somewhere out there, Sentinel was patrolling, guarding the very machine that held her sister's fragment. She imagined his skull-helmed head turning toward her, as if sensing the moment she crossed the line from hunted to hunter. "You say 62 minutes," she said, her voice low. "When does the clock start?" Nir's mouth curved into something that might have been a smile, though it held no warmth. "The moment you step inside the spire. But first, you must get there. And the way is not empty." As if summoned by his words, the sand below shifted, breaking apart in jagged spirals. Kaelin saw the glint of metal in the depths before shapes began to emerge. Sleek, multi-limbed machines with bone-like armor plates, their heads twitching in quick, bird-like motions. Hunter-killers. They had caught their scent. The graft flared hot along her spine. The whispers of the dead pressing against her thoughts, urging her to call them. She knew if she did, the skeletal predators would rip these machines apart and take another piece of her with them. Nir watched her with an unreadable expression. "Well, Kaelin, will you bleed for the living or for the dead?" She drew in a breath, steady and sharp, her hand brushing the hilt of her plasma blade. Her eyes locked on the nearest machine, and in her mind she felt the predators begin to stir. She wasn't sure if she was more afraid of losing the fight or of winning it. Either way, she stepped forward. The wasteland swallowed the sound of her voice, but the words were clear enough. "Let's find out." And somewhere deep in the spire, the Oblivion engine waited, its hunger growing by the minute. The training ground Nir had chosen was a dead basin at the edge of the wasteland, its floor littered with fractured alloy spines jutting from the sand like the ribs of some ancient predator. The air shimmered with heat, though the light here came not from any sun, but from the pulsing fissures in the ground. Kaelin stood at the center, the graft in her spine throbbing like a second heartbeat. Nir stood at the edge, his tall frame still as bone, his eyes locked on her like a surgeon watching a patient about to go under the knife. "Call them," he said. Kaelin's fingers twitched. The whispers in her head, usually faint and distant, surged forward. Urgent, eager. She let the sensation rise, pushing past the instinct to fight it. The temperature seemed to drop, shadows thickening until the fractured ground was veined with black. The sand began to stir. The first skeletal predator erupted from beneath her feet, a blur of bone and metallic sinew. Its skull stretched into a hooked snarl, then another and another, until half a dozen circled her, their limbs jointed at unnatural angles, claws scraping lines in the dirt. They didn't look at her. They looked outward, toward the canyon wall where movement glinted in the haze. A squad of alien patrols, 4 soldiers in jagged armor, weapons raised, stepped into view. They hesitated, their attention snagging on the unnatural creatures that now stalked toward them. The predators moved like water poured over jagged stone, weaving in and out of one another, their spines rattling in a syncopated rhythm that made Kaelin's skin prickle. She didn't need to tell them what to do. They already knew. With a collective shriek, they launched themselves at the aliens. The clash was immediate and vicious. Bone against metal, claws piercing armor, alien screams slicing the air. Kaelin felt every motion as if it were her own, the tearing of flesh, the crunch of bone, the spray of hot blood. It was intoxicating and revolting in equal measure. Then the tide shifted. One predator broke from the fight and turned toward her. Its empty eye sockets locked on her face, and for a moment it didn't move. Then it tilted its head, the motion eerily human, and the whispers in her head sharpened into words. "Sao." Her body locked. The voice was her sister's, impossible, perfect, raw with hurt. She stumbled back, the graft pulsing hard enough to make her vision blur. Another predator joined the first, circling her, then another. The rest abandoned the dying patrol to converge on her position. The whispers multiplied, overlapping until she could barely think. Some voices were pleading, others accusing. Her sisters cut through them all, growing louder. "You forgot me, you left me, you let them take me." Kaelin's breath came fast, her chest tight. She tried to command them to stop, but the words snagged in her throat, caught between thought and terror. The predators closed in, claws flexing, spines rattling like warning drums. For a heartbeat she couldn't tell if they were hunting her or testing her. Nir moved without a sound, crossing the distance in a blur. "Ah!" His hand struck the graft at the base of her neck, and the predators froze mid-step. One by one, they sank into the sand as if dragged downward by invisible hooks, their forms dissolving into black motes before vanishing entirely. The air warmed again, the shadows receding. Kaelin dropped to one knee, pressing a hand to her temple. The whispers faded, but the echo of her sister's voice clung to the edges of her mind like frost that wouldn't melt. What the hell was that? She demanded, looking up at Nier. He regarded her with the same cold detachment as always. A warning. The graph does not distinguish between friend and foe. It draws on the dead, and the dead are not loyal. They remember things you wish they didn't. They will use those memories against you. They sounded like her, Kaelin said, her voice low. Exactly like her. Perhaps they were, Nier replied, his tone unreadable. Or perhaps they were fragments of your mind, reshaped by the chorus. Does it matter? Her jaw tightened. It matters if I can't trust what I'm hearing. You can't, he said simply. Every time you call them, you trade something of yourself. A memory, a name, a reason. One day you will trade away the reason you fight. When that happens, you will still have the power, but you will no longer know why you use it. She pushed herself to her feet, brushing the grit from her palms. You didn't mention that before. You didn't ask, Nier said. The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the distant whine of wind over the canyon walls. Kaelin turned her gaze toward the horizon, where the faint glow of the spire of ash shimmered through the heat haze. Somewhere inside it, her sister's fragment waited. But the thought lodged like a splinter in her mind. If the predators could mimic her sister's voice so perfectly now, what would happen the next time she summoned them, and the time after that? What if the last memory she had of her sister was just another echo the dead had fed her, her hands curled into fists? She needed the predators. Without them, the odds of breaching the spire were close to zero. But every time she used them, she could feel something slipping away, not just in her mind, but in her bones. She glanced back at Nier. If I lose the reason I fight, you make sure I stop. For good. His expression didn't change. If you reach that point, Kaelin, you won't let me. The basin was quiet again, but she could still feel the predators beneath the sand, waiting. The graft pulsed once more, a reminder that the dead were patient and that their hunger was endless. The citadel of glass rose from the wasteland like a shard of a shattered star, its surface a mosaic of reflective panels that caught the fractured light and bent it into blinding patterns. Even from a distance, Kaelin could feel the hum of the place, not just through her ears but through the graft embedded in her spine, as if the citadel's very walls resonated with the echoes of the minds it contained. Each panel, each corridor, was a vault for stolen consciousness. Her sister's fragment was in there somewhere, locked in digital stasis, suspended between life and nothingness. She approached under the cover of the skeletal predators, their forms phasing in and out of shadow as they moved with her. The air here was thinner, colder, the sky above a dull violet. The citadel's outer guards were few arrogance, she thought, or maybe certainty. They didn't expect anyone to come here alive. The predators tore through them quickly, their claws finding seams in the alien armor with unerring precision. Kaelin moved like a ghost through the aftermath, stepping over twisted limbs and shattered visors, her eyes fixed on the massive obsidian doors ahead. Inside, the air was worse, thick with a low, constant vibration that set her teeth on edge. The corridor walls were smooth glass, each panel faintly illuminated from within, as if lit by something trapped inside. She didn't look too closely. She'd heard the stories. Stare long enough, and you'd see faces, frozen mid-scream, their eyes following you as you passed. The graft pulsed again, this time stronger. She tightened her grip on the hilt of her plasma blade. The predators were restless. They knew something she didn't. The corridor opened into a vast chamber, its floor a mirror, its ceiling lost in darkness. At the center stood Sentinel. The bone-plated armor gleamed under the cold light, each plate engraved with marks that were neither letters nor symbols she recognized. The helm's skull face tilted slightly as she entered, the reflective floor amplifying the sound of his voice until it felt like it came from everywhere at once. "I've seen many take risks," he said, the words slow, deliberate. "But you—" He stepped forward, the sound of his armored boots ringing out like a clock counting down. "You are the only one who would erase yourself to save something already dead." Kaelin's jaw tightened. "She's not dead." Sentinel tilted his head again, almost pitying. "A fragment is not a person. It is a shadow, a whisper. You think you can pull her back from that? You'll end up as another fragment in the engine's vaults." "Maybe," Kaelin said, stepping closer, the predators materializing in a semicircle around her. "But I'd rather die trying than let her vanish." He didn't move aside. Instead, his right arm unfolded, revealing a blade of black alloy edged with crackling blue light. "Then come. Let's see if the dead can save you from me." The fight was immediate and brutal. Sentinel's strikes were precise, meant to break joints and sever tendons. Kaelin moved faster than she should have been able to, her graft feeding into her reflexes, the predators lunging in coordinated bursts to drive him back. For a moment, she thought she had him. One predator leapt high, slamming into his shoulder and forcing him to a knee. She surged forward, blade raised with a killing strike, and the world shifted. The predators froze. Then, without warning, they turned. Not toward Sentinel. Toward her. "What the hell?" she started, but the graft flared in pain, like molten wire twisting down her spine. The whispers in her head spiked into a deafening roar. The words indistinguishable, but the intent clear. "She is prey." Sentinel laughed, low and cruel. "Did you really think you were in control?" One predator slammed into her side, knocking the breath from her lungs. Another hooked its claws into her left arm. Metal, tearing against metal as it tried to rip the cabled tendons free. She twisted, stabbing her blade into its chest, but the connection between them made it feel like she was stabbing herself. Her grip faltered. Through the haze of pain, she caught movement at the edge of the chamber. "Nya!" Standing in the shadows beyond the mirrored floor. His hands were raised, not in defense, but in command. Her breath caught, fury cutting through the confusion. "He was the one doing this. Why?" she shouted, struggling against the predator's weight. One clawed at her helm, another at her throat. Nir's voice carried across the chamber, calm as ever. "I needed to see how far you could go without the graft's consent. You lasted longer than most." Rage flared, white hot. "You set me up." Sentinel took a slow step back, watching her with interest. "So your leash holder has other plans. How delightful." The predators closed in, their claws piercing deeper into her arm. Pain shot through her, bright and sharp, and she realized they weren't just tearing her apart. They were targeting the graft itself. The arm's cabled plating buckled under the assault. She made a choice. With a free hand, she triggered the emergency severance charge embedded in the joint. A burst of white-hot energy tore through the connection, and her left arm dropped to the mirrored floor with a clang. Still gripped in the predator's claws, the sudden break shocked them, giving her a fraction of a second to roll away. The smell of burning alloy filled the chamber. Her left side was a mess of exposed wires and scorched flesh, but she was alive. Sentinel stood motionless, his head tilted as if weighing whether to press the attack. Ner had already melted back into the shadows, his presence like smoke, dissipating into the air. Kaelin rose slowly, her blade still in her remaining hand, her breathing ragged. She met Sentinel's gaze, her voice raw. "This isn't over." He gave a slight nod, almost respectful. "No, it's not." She backed toward the corridor, the predators watching but no longer moving, as if unsure who to follow. Her missing arm throbbed in phantom pain, but it wasn't just the injury that made her chest feel hollow. She had known not to trust easily. Now she knew she couldn't trust at all, not even the one who had brought her back. And worse, the truth gnawed at her as she slipped back into the Citadel's corridors. If Ner could turn her power against her so easily, then maybe the Oblivion Engine's destruction wasn't his goal at all. Maybe he wanted it to fire, and maybe, just maybe, she was the key to making that happen. The heart of the Oblivion Engine was a cathedral of metal and light, a vast chamber whose walls pulsed with an eerie glow, as though they were breathing. Hundreds of cables as thick as tree trunks descended from the ceiling into the core below, where a sphere of blinding white energy spun slowly, surrounded by a lattice of alien machinery. Inside that sphere, Kaelin knew, were billions of minds, bound together in an unending scream she could almost hear if she let herself listen. Somewhere among them was her sister's fragment, flickering in the tide of stolen consciousness. The countdown timer burned red on her visor, CO817. Each second dropped like a hammer in her skull. The graft in her spine ached, the predators restless beneath her skin. She sprinted forward, her boots clanging against the metal causeway, the air heavy with the smell of ozone and scorched metal. The first wave hit before she reached the halfway point. Alien soldiers in armor, glistening chitons, stepped from alcoves in the walls, weapons humming with charged energy. Kaelin didn't slow. The predators burst from the shadows at her command, tearing into the soldiers with a frenzy that rattled the deck. Limbs and shards of armor flew. Kaelin moved through the chaos like a blade through silk, her plasma weapon cutting arcs of white heat. Then the comm crackled in her ear, Nir's voice sliding into her mind like a knife. "Kaelin," he said, his tone calm, almost conversational. "There is something you should know before you continue." She kept moving, cutting down another alien that lunged from her right. "If this is about how dangerous it is, save it." "It's not about danger," he replied. "It's about purpose. The Oblivion Engine's destruction will release an energy surge unlike anything this galaxy has seen. Enough to reawaken the seed minds of my people. If you destroy it, the surge will bring them back. If you fail, they will remain dust." Kaelin's grip tightened on her weapon. "You said this was about stopping the harvest. It is, but you and I have different stakes. I have no sister in there, Kaelin. I have an entire species waiting to breathe again. If you destroy the core the wrong way, if you simply shut it down, everything, your sister, my people, will be lost. You're asking me to power it up before I tear it apart, she said. I'm telling you, Nier said, his voice suddenly sharp, that if you don't, you will lose everything you came here for, and I will lose everything I am. Before she could answer, the next wave arrived, larger, faster. And this time, something was wrong. The predators she had summoned moments ago slowed, their heads tilting in unison toward her. The whispers in her skull grew louder, jagged, full of hunger. She staggered as a spike of pain shot down her spine. Han! They're not listening, she realized aloud. Nier's voice was distant now, muffled by the pounding in her ears. They've tasted too much death. They want more. You'll have to dominate them completely, or they will feed on whatever is nearest. Two predators lunged, not at the aliens, but at her. She dropped under the first, slicing its neck with a quick upward arc, but the second slammed into her from behind, driving her to the floor. She rolled, firing a plasma burst into its chest, the recoil ringing through her bones. Around her, the alien soldiers pressed closer, their weapons flashing in the dark. Kaelin fought like a cornered animal, every movement a calculation for survival. She used the Grat's full force, yanking the predators back under her control with a thought that felt like tearing muscle from bone. They screamed, not aloud, but in her head, and surged toward the aliens again. The countdown. CO5, CO5, seal. She forced her way toward the core, the air shimmering with the heat of weapons fire. Another predator turned on her, and she didn't hesitate this time. One slash, one burst, and it dissolved into shadow. Everyone she lost made her feel lighter, emptier. She didn't have time to think about what that meant. When she reached the platform around the core, the light was blinding. The lattice of alien machinery spun faster now, the hum rising in pitch. She could feel it pulling at her, at the graft, at her mind like a tide trying to drag her under. Nier's voice returned, quieter now, almost reverent. If you open yourself to it, Kaelin, you can channel every soul in that sphere. You can end this in one strike, but it will burn you away. There will be nothing left. She stared at the core, its surface rippling like water. Somewhere in there, her sister's voice called. Not in words, but in the pull she had felt since the day she lost her. She thought about what Nier had said about his people waiting for their rebirth, about the predators that would never stop hungering, about herself, and how much of her was already gone. The countdown, 02,113. The aliens were still coming. The predators were snapping at the edges of her control. Every choice she had left was bad. She knew, with a cold clarity, that if she didn't do this now, no one would walk out of here alive. She dropped to one knee, pressing both hands to the graft at her spine. The predators froze mid-strike, their claws inches from alien throats. The graft screamed to her nerves, the whispers turning into a unified howl. She gave them everything, every memory, every thought, every reason, pouring it into the summoning. The floor buckled. The walls cracked. From the shadows between the panels, hundreds, thousands of skeletal predators erupted, their bodies massive and warped, their spines like jagged towers. They swarmed across the chamber in a storm of bone and steel, tearing through alien soldiers, through machinery, through the very walls. The hum of the core reached a shriek, the light flaring until it swallowed everything. Kaelin stood at the center of the maelstrom, her body burning from the inside out. She could feel herself unraveling, each thread of her mind dissolving into the tide of power she'd unleashed. The predators howled with her voice, their claws rending the lattice around the core until it shattered. The sphere imploded in silence, the light collapsing into a single point before erupting outward in a wave that swept. Through the citadel, through the wasteland, through the skies beyond, Kaelin felt the release, the billions of minds scattering into freedom, her sister's fragment among them, lifting like smoke into the stars. She was falling before she realized it, her knees giving way. Her vision tunneled, the graft's heat fading into cold. Somewhere far away she thought she heard her sister's voice again, soft and clear this time. Pi, 1, si, tai, do. Her lips moved around the words as the darkness closed in. You're free! And then Kaelin was gone, her body crumpled on the shattered floor, the storm of bone fading into dust. The first thing Kaelin felt was the grit of ash against her lips. The air was cold, the kind of cold that seeped under the skin and made the bones feel hollow. She pushed herself upright, her limbs heavy, her movements sluggish, as though she'd been buried under the wasteland for centuries. Around her stretched an endless plain of blackened sand, flecked with fragments of bone that glinted faintly under the fractured light. The sky above was a jagged wound of gray and crimson, torn apart where the Oblivion engine's core had detonated. She turned her head, and there it was, or what was left of it. The massive sphere that had once held billions of minds was now a collapsed ruin, its intricate lattice shattered into heaps of pale shards. The hum that had saturated the air inside the citadel was gone, replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed against her ears. For a moment she wondered if she'd gone deaf. Then the wind stirred, carrying the faint rattle of bone debris shifting in the sand. Memory flickered, bright and sharp in places, smeared and empty in others. She remembered the fight, the predators surging like a storm, the light of the core imploding. She remembered her sister's voice, soft, almost tender, right before everything went black. But when she tried to picture her face, nothing came. No features, no sound of her laughter, no memory of her touch. It was like trying to grasp smoke with bare hands. Movement in the distance caught her eye, a lone figure picking their way across the ruins, stumbling slightly. The wind shifted, and she knew. She didn't know how, but she knew. Her sister! Kaelin rose, unsteady at first, then more sure, her boots crunching over the brittle surface. The closer she got, the more she saw. The girl's dark hair tangled by the wind, her thin frame wrapped in a borrowed cloak, her steps cautious but determined. When their eyes met, Kaelin stopped short. They were the same eyes she remembered. At least, she thought she remembered. But they looked at her with polite confusion. No recognition, no flicker of relief or joy, just the wary caution of a stranger faced with someone who might be dangerous. Kaelin's breath caught. She opened her mouth, but nothing came. What would she even say? She didn't know her name anymore. She didn't know the sound of her voice. All she had was the cold certainty that she had fought and bled and killed for this person. And now, they didn't know her. And worse, she didn't know them. Her sister's gaze lingered for a moment longer, then slid past her to the horizon. Without a word, she walked on, leaving Kaelin standing in the ash. The wind rose again, scattering bone fragments across the ground, and a glint of light caught her eye. Something small lay half buried at her feet, a shard of metal no bigger than her palm. She picked it up and recognized Nir's craftsmanship immediately, the alien alloy, the faint etching of those same strange symbols she'd seen on his armor. She turned it over. On the reverse side, lines of text in the human alphabet, her language. She read it once, twice, her fingers tightening around the shard. You have won, but the price was yourself. She stared at the words for a long time, her jaw tight. Nir was gone. No trace of him in the ash, no sign of his long frame among the ruins. Whether he had achieved his goal, whether his people now walked again somewhere in the galaxy, she couldn't know. She wasn't sure she wanted to. Kaelin slipped the shard into a pocket and turned her gaze upward. The sky was still torn from the detonation, streaks of raw energy bleeding into the thin clouds. Ships moved in the distance, small silhouettes against the light, scavengers or survivors coming to pick through the wreckage. None of them would know what had happened here, not really. She started walking. There was no path to follow, no destination waiting. The predators were silent in her mind now, the graft cold against her spine, like a scar left by a healed wound. She wondered if they were gone for good, or if they were simply waiting for her to call them again. Every step carried her farther from the ruins, from the citadel, from the place where her sister had looked at her and seen no one she recognized. The wind tore at her coat, carrying the scent of scorched metal and dust. She thought of the shard in her pocket. She thought of Nir's voice the first time she had heard it, cold and certain. You are dead, but I will not allow it. She thought of Sentinel, of the way he had watched her even as she fled the citadel's mirrored floor. None of them would ever speak her name, because there was no name to speak any more. Kaelin reached the crest of a ridge and stopped. From here, the wasteland stretched to the horizon, broken only by the skeletal remains of war machines long abandoned. In the distance, a storm was building, its black wall rolling toward her with the slow inevitability of time. She breathed in, the air sharp in her lungs. No one would remember her here. Not her sister, not Nir, not the billions of freed minds. But they were free. That was enough. She stepped forward into the storm, the ash swirling up to swallow her. Somewhere above, the fractured sky groaned, and the light faded to shadow. Kaelin kept walking, the ghost of a warrior who had given everything, leaving nothing behind but the silence. Across the scattered outposts of the border worlds, the name Bonecaller passed from mouth to mouth like a secret carried on the wind. No one agreed on all the details. Some said she had been a mercenary. Others claimed she was a deserter from a forgotten war, but the core of the story was always the same. A lone woman had walked into the heart of the Oblivion engine, called death to her side, and torn apart the machine that had been swallowing human minds for decades. It was told in hushed tones in mining stations, in smoky bars on asteroid colonies, in the quiet between trade convoys that skirted the wastelands. There were no hollows, no records, only words, and maybe that made the story stronger. People could fill in the gaps with their own fears, their own hopes. In some tellings, she had commanded an army of skeletal beasts that blotted out the sun, each one the restless spirit of someone lost to the harvest. In others, she had walked alone, facing the alien tyrant with nothing but a blade and the will to die for her cause. And always, in the end, she was gone. No body, no grave, just the whisper of her last words. Kaelin's truth was simpler and crueler. She had won. The Oblivion engine was gone. The billions of trapped minds had been freed. But in giving the command that unleashed the predators with all their fury, she had poured the last of herself into the summoning. Her memories, her reasons, the anchors that had made her who she was, they were stripped away piece by piece. She had left the battlefield alive, but she was not the woman who had stepped into it. No one on the border worlds knew that part. They didn't see her wandering the ash plains, unrecognized even by the sister she had fought to save. They didn't see the hollow way she moved, the way she stared at the horizon as if trying to remember why she was walking toward it. They remembered only the fire and the victory, and maybe that was enough. Yet in every version of the tale, there was a single line, spoken as though it had been carved into the bones of the galaxy itself. Some swore they had heard it in a dream. Others said it came from a transmission intercepted just after the engine's destruction. Sikma hongfai yiki, tiki, mahongi, ti. Siki, mahongi. Shing de hong. Na, nyo, chichen, dongbok, na. Ma, chinma, na, chinma, na. Ha, chinma, na chinma, na chinma, na chinjongong, shingongwa. The words traveled faster than her story. They were painted on walls in the slums of orbital cities, scrawled in the margins of soldiers' manuals, whispered in the ears of children when they asked why people fought at all. They carried no instruction for victory, no map to follow, only a warning and a choice. For those who heard it, the question lingered long after. What would I choose to keep? Kaelin herself didn't think of the words as hers anymore. Joe! When she tried to remember speaking them, she couldn't find the moment. She imagined the bone caller, some other woman, fierce and unbroken, standing in the heart of the citadel and saying them with a clarity Kaelin no longer possessed. She wondered if that woman had known she was speaking her own epitaph. She stayed to the shadows now, drifting from one border station to another, never staying long enough for the rumors to catch up. Sometimes she would hear the name Bone Caller and feel a flicker of recognition, like the echo of a sound she couldn't quite place. Sometimes she would watch a ship depart, its crew laughing and alive, and feel a strange, quiet satisfaction she couldn't explain. The galaxy moved on. The Oblivion engine was gone, but there would be other machines, other tyrants. People would fight and die and tell new stories. Hers would fade, worn down into a myth so distant from the truth that no one would ever connect it to the solitary figure moving through the dust on a night lit by the cold blue of a distant sun. She stood on the edge of a station platform, watching freighters lift into the dark. She pulled from her pocket the shard Nair had left her, the one with his message etched into its surface. Her fingers traced the alien symbols without thinking, then the human letters beneath. You have won, but the price was yourself. The words didn't anger her anymore. They didn't even sting. They were simply fact, like the silence after a battle. She closed her hand around the shard and looked out over the void, thinking of all the choices she could still make, even without the memories of why she had started. And somewhere in the black between the stars, she imagined her sister free, alive, living a life Kaelin could no longer share. She hoped, without knowing why, that it was a good one. The legends would keep growing without her. That was their way. They would make her taller, stronger, faster. They would strip away the fear, the doubt, the compromises. They would forget the cost. But maybe, hidden in those words she had left behind, some part of the truth would survive. She turned from the platform, her boots echoing against the steel as she walked into the shadowed corridors of the station. The question followed her, as it always did. If to save the world you had to give up the memory that made you human, would you still do it? For Kaelin, the answer had already been written into her bones. For everyone else, it was still waiting.